Navigating the post-secondary transition process for students with disabilities will be both challenging and, believe it or not, exciting. As your child and your family approach this chapter of their life and journey, it's essential to understand the intricacies of this transition. This process encompasses a range of decisions, from selecting agencies or vocational programs to securing necessary accommodations and preparing for the demands of adulthood. In our discussions, we're working to provide families with valuable insights and resources to help you support your young adult's successful transition, ensuring you have the tools and opportunities they need to thrive in their chosen path while managing the unique considerations that come with disabilities.
And hello, hello, hello. We are here for the Post Secondary Transition podcast where we have these conversations. My name is Patrick Cadigan, and I do have a co host, and who would that be?
I am Megan Smallwood, and I'm a public school transition coordinator.
All right, and we're back for another one. Here we go.
We are, and I think it's an important one, and one that kind of came up out of, I don't want to say out of thin air, but, just after discussions with people this past week, actually. And Patrick and I were talking, and we were like, you know what? This is important. And I know it's important to you because you work with the middle school population and families and students who are just starting that transition journey. So you get
Yeah,
it.
I do. I do. And so, where we're going to start this discussion is it is certainly a discussion that gives a lot of families angst, but we wanted to start out by talking about having the conversation around making the change from recognizing that that families want their children to go to school and graduate with a high school diploma, or making the decision to remove them from the diploma-bound track and have them go into the certificate track.
Right. And I think that's just one of the many things that came up, like it's a hard fact. It's hard to talk about. I mean, just talking from other parents, and I know with my own experience with my sister, you start out even before your child's born having this plan of they're going to go to school and they might go to college and they're going to have a job, and all of a sudden, life happens and now it's changed. And I think that discussion of diploma versus certificate, especially I think in our county too, it just seems so black and white when it's not. There's so much room for gray area in between it, and I think there's kind of that misnomer by parents that they don't realize that it can be very individualized and they can still have such a say in it.
Let's start off then by addressing one of the myths. Typically, the conversations that I have had with parents who are starting that journey of moving from diploma bound to non diploma bound, their biggest fear is that simply by being removed from curriculum based instruction translates to they are no longer going to receive an education.
Right, exactly. And if you switch from the diploma to certificate, you're automatically shoved in a corner in, a self-contained class all day, every day, no connection to your, regular peers. And that is not the case at all. Parents just need to, at a younger age, understand that it's okay to accept who they are, and if the path is not going to be a diploma, because I know from my experience I've seen a lot of students who have remained on that path for so long, and it was just the pressure and the stress of trying to perform to something that clearly was not a good match for them. It didn't really benefit them.
And one of the things that I'm going to throw out there, being the middle school teacher, and again, this is a hard topic to discuss because
It is. I'm not trying to tread lightly, but at the same time, it's like you want to be as brutally honest.
yeah, the conversations that I've had with parents around this topic typically start with it is their decision. No one
Hmm.
is going to, no one wants to force them into it.
Hmm.
And I will be honest, it's one of those things where even with discussion with other teachers at my level, right? Like I've had those conversations before where someone was like, "Oh, well, that student is going to be non-diploma bound, right? So, we can just do this and this and this." But at the end of the day, the parents ultimately have to agree to it, and it is a process. Like, it's not
Mhm.
just something that's going to happen overnight. And it is something that can be considered and discussed, and you don't have to do it. I will remember one of the parents that I had worked with a couple of years ago. In so her son has Down syndrome, and she had shared with me later on that one of her biggest frustrations was is that she felt like the school system had what really like pushed for her son to be removed from the diploma track at fifth grade. And it was interesting because she said that I didn't necessarily disagree with it, but I just couldn't figure out why it had to be right then and there. Um, and ultimately, by the time that my student went from middle school into high school, again, that transition that they ultimately made a lot of sense. But it definitely was a topic of frustration for her, and I have always kept that in the back of my mind.
Yeah, and I think one frustration I see from a lot of the teachers at the high school level who, looking at the student as a whole, if a student comes up and is still on the diploma track, and we know that there are gaps and, areas that they really need more support in aside from the academic, it's hard to find time during the day to really help them with those skills when the focus is academics because of them being on a diploma track. And I think the frustration for me is when I talk to parents who, are saying, I really want them to be able to help out more at home, or I want them to live independently. But again, how do you focus on that now to get them ready for the future when you also want them in algebra too? Or you want them, passing the HSAs. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them participating in a math class. I'm all for the exposure because you just never know what a student's going to pick up. You don't want to box them in. But at the same time, the flexibility within their day to have the time to focus on some more functional stuff is so valuable.
So, a little bit of background. I used to work for a construction site safety company, and it was owned by my best friend. And one of the things that he always talked about, he has had frustration for years that he felt like that specifically community colleges or smaller colleges needed to focus more on the trades, right? And that so many of kids going out of high school were being pushed to go to college. And, his argument was always like, not everybody is college material, but if you could, move these students into like something like a trade, that is a solid career. Not everybody has to go to college. And, the trades, like, just that more should be done.
Yeah, and I feel like that's become a big highlight in our county over the last year or so. And I know there's more opportunities coming up for that. But along with that, even the kids without IEPs, I feel like the school systems in general just kind of do a disservice to letting them graduate and going on to their next step and not having a lot of those functional skills. I mean, I know years ago they had a financial literacy class, when I was at my other high school, and I think some of the schools have it back now, but it was such a valuable class for them to learn how to balance a checkbook and just online banking and paycheck. You get a paycheck from your first job. Where are you going to put that? What does direct deposit mean? Like all those things that where's the time in the day to do that if you're on, focused so much on the other academia? But I digress.
All right. Well, that's okay. So, obviously, we've opened up a can of worms here.
Yeah,
Let's have a
absolutely.
let's have a discussion around when we talk about, and you're the transition coordinator, so I'm going to kind of throw this out there. When you think about functional life skills or skills that are important in a job market, what are the ones that you're
Mhm.
thinking about?
And a lot of times I think it starts with those soft skills, like which we focus on in the building before we take them out of the building in our work programs. But just being able to take in constructive criticism, knowing how to advocate and speak up for yourself, with a manager, being able to be on time, being able to complete multi-step tasks. Like there's so many skills that can be worked on, and just help prepare for them to be better, citizens out in the world. But you need the time to do that. And I think it's not only the school side, it's the home side. And I'm going to be brutally honest here. You need to put expectations on your child to do them. I know growing up when my sister and I, were younger, I never realized my sister had a disability until maybe into my teen years because my sister had chores just like me. My sister was disciplined just like me. My sister had to do, everything the same. Granted, it was at her level, but, she didn't get away with anything. And I think it's so important that we can't underestimate, individuals' disabilities and say, oh, well, they're not going to be able to, take the garbage out or set the table or whatever it is. Give them the opportunity to prove you wrong. It, they definitely can. And if that isn't the skill for them, there's something else they can help out with. But just making sure those life skills and those functional skills are embedded somewhere throughout their day. I'll get off my soapbox now. This is a very passionate topic for me just because, like I said, with my sister, I saw what my parents did right in that sense. They knew she had disability, but they're like, all right, you can feed the cat, you can change the litter box. She had expectations, and I that was very important. So along with those life skills and making sure that there was opportunities for that, I think the my parents also had a very realistic approach to long-term goals with her. And this has been something that I've had conversations with a lot of parents, and there's no wrong answer. It's what works best for your family, your individual. But I think also recognizing that the world has changed, and our young adults and our family members and our individuals with disabilities have a part of, they can all play an important part in society and in our community. There's a place for them. This past week, talking with a parent, she talked about when she learned of her child's diagnosis back when she was younger, age of 4. And from there on, her focus for every, goal she made in her life was around her daughter and their path moving forward. It can be something hard to understand, but again, it's what works best for your family. But it's like, I think the thing that I want to stress, to everyone who's listening, is just try and see what others may see in your young adult. I think a lot of times when we go to an IEP meeting and the team's reporting out on the great positive things they've achieved over the year, we've had parents who maybe jokingly were like, "Oh, okay, if you see that, sure, I don't see that at home." I think it's because, I see with my kids at home, they're who they are because they're comfortable and they can be, they're not performing like they have to at school. But I think take what everyone's telling you with a grain of salt and understand that they are capable. As you as the parent are going to be that constant after 21, take what you hear and move forward with that and advocate for them best you can, whatever it may be. It could be a job, it could be some community outings, it could be a new program that you got together with other parents to form because you didn't find exactly what you wanted out there in the world. Just know you have the power to make the best world for your child.
And isn't that one of the biggest challenges, right? In the sense that, we have had those conversations with parents who have been able to create those opportunities, right? Like I'm thinking specifically of Pam when she had talked about her son Mark, and she was the person who was out there and advocating for him and looking for jobs for him. But then we've also heard from other parents who have said that no matter how hard they've tried, that they, based on the needs of their children, that they have just continued to struggle to find and make those opportunities. So yeah, it definitely, it's it's different. It's different for everybody, and in some cases, it's rewarding and exciting, and then in other cases, it's frustrating and just
Yeah.
debilitating.
Right. And that's, you might get knocked down. You might get told no. You might, not get the outcome. Like we always say in our intro, you might not get the outcome that you wanted, but, you just get back up again, like with anything else in your life. I feel like I'm giving a motivational speech here, but, it's just so important to see, what others have done. And you might be sitting there saying, well, I can't do that. You can, you absolutely can. And I think that's one of the reasons why, having all those around you that know your child and know you, like, come together and share, so important that you get that person centered plan together about not just what you see, but all the pieces, because that's really what's going to make a successful transition.
Well, and then from the teacher side, one of the things that I've always found interesting, and considering how you and I kind of got together and started doing what we're doing, I am constantly on the lookout for people who have stories to tell or who have done these things. And we've talked about it before when we're on our Facebook groups, and there are all these discussions and conversations around all of these things that are happening, and again, the frustrations, the triumphs, the good, the bad. It is, it's just this sharing. It's a sharing of resources. It's a sharing of understanding. So, and it's something new, and it happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of depends on where you are and what it is you're doing.
Right. And we always say this, you're not alone in it, just you need to get out there and find others who, can join your team or you can collaborate with. And it might get you out of your comfort zone, but in the end, it could be the best thing you do.
So as we're having this conversation, one of the biggest things, if you were to throw out there to families, who can they rely on? Who can they lean on?
And I know they have so many resources as they go through the schooling and therapies and, anyone else that comes along the educational path of their child. They're great, but I also know, sitting on the other side of the table, that it's hard sometimes. You hear all these things, but they don't walk in your shoes. And I know a parent has told me, like, the best resource that they had was other parents. It just being able to talk to someone who knows exactly what you're going through, there's just something so comforting about that. And being able to run ideas by them or ask them for advice, and just having them on your side, make those connections with other parents. Like we said, there's social media now. It's so much easier to go out and find a Facebook group for families with autism or whatever disability it may be, or transition. There's so many transition Facebook groups out there. But even at the school, it's the if your child is in, the class with other students, for years at a time, get to know the other parents. Like, start forming a group so that you've got someone else there with you. So, as you're transitioning together, you can go out together to start exploring all these agencies and timelines and everything like that. But also those who have gone through the process, they're so key in being able to pick their brain about what they went through and their advice and what you should be doing now and what you should have done sooner. But I think that's what it all goes back to, like starting young. Even if it's finding your people, finding, the information, like it all comes back to starting as early on as you can. And we know that's hard to do when you're dealing with other natural transitions, like, a child's going to middle school, your child's going to high school. The last thing you want to think about is 21, but it all plays a part. You need to start thinking young about what is the ultimate goal.
I remember when we had the conversation with Liz Burley, a couple of months back. She was for our new listeners. She was a transition coordinator of 40 plus years. She was at a different county than us, but one of her biggest takeaways, and one of the things that she impressed upon me the most, was this sense to have there are times when having those hard conversations are essential because there are things that are uncomfortable to discuss, but they need to be because you have to take those into consideration when you're thinking about long-term and long-term goals.
And I think that's why, when we were talking and deciding to do this podcast, it was so important because we both recognize it's uncomfortable and it's hard to, it might be a hard pill to swallow, but it hopefully will resonate with families, even if it's just kind of in the back of your mind, like, "Ugh, what did they mean by that?" Like, at least it gets you thinking. I think a lot of the times, and I, sit on these IEP meetings and it's the elephant in the room, like, oh, well, we all know that the student really, might need this or should be doing this or whatever's coming. But it is hard to be the one to, kind of break that ice and start the conversation. So,
Well, and let's be honest. I mean, one of the reasons why it's so hard is because the perception is that you're the one who's being negative, right? Like
right.
we want to sit in these meetings and we want to be like, "Oh, this is wonderful and this is great and this is this and this is that." But as soon as you bring up like, some of some of it, it's kind of like, "Oh, thanks there,
Well,
Donnie Downer."
right, because you work with these families day in and day out. You build up these rapports and relationships. You don't want it to crack because you had to go and, break the ice and tell them the hard truths about things, and now they want nothing to do with you. But, hopefully over time they realize you have their child's best interest at heart. It's just hard.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no easy answer.
There isn't, but hopefully this at least gets you thinking.
On paper, it
Yeah.
it's like you lay it out and you
Yeah.
think that you know the direction that it's going to go in, but the reality is as soon as you start talking about it, in at least for me with this conversation, in the back of my mind I'm thinking of family,
Yes.
A that I worked with 2 years
Yes. Yep.
ago, and then family B like last week, and just all of
Yeah.
these, really really significant challenges.
That's just it. I think of all the families over the years and all the different ways it's gone, and I think all the times I've wanted to be brutally honest and I couldn't, and there's just like you can't get it out, but you want to just be like, you need to understand this now. Yeah, it's tough.
Some families are ready sooner than others. But
Yeah.
again, I think it goes back to the journey, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody's journey is a little bit different. In my experience, up until this point, I have learned that there are certain families who are willing to have the conversation earlier than others. For
Hmm.
those who are not willing to have the conversation, don't force it.
Right.
Just if
Yep, that's the other thing.
and I mean, as a middle school teacher, like
Hmm.
that's the thing. And again, I kind of have to remind both myself and my colleagues that, like, guys, we don't have to have this discussion right now. Like, high
Right.
school is coming.
Right. And I think too, at least approaching the conversation, reading the family. If the family is like, "Oh, no, no, no," like, okay, we'll try again next year, but at least putting that bug in there. Because sometimes you just don't know how the family's going to react. We've had families who are like, "Oh yeah, I was wondering about that. I thought it would be great to think about or have a discussion about it." So you just don't know.
Yeah.
But I think an attempt is necessary. At least then too, you can document and try again next year.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And I definitely think that that's a good place to not stop the conversation, but pause it for a little while, because I'm sure that we're going to, as we have other conversations along down the line, we're going to keep coming back to this. But one of the things that we always do is we want to throw out helpful resources to families. And Megan is always teasing me because I'm always throwing out podcasts, but I am definitely an audio guy. Like, we are so busy these days that sometimes it's just easier to listen to something, kind of as you're going along. Like I am famous for jumping on my lawnmower to mow the lawn and popping in my my AirPods and listening to either a podcast or an audiobook or something like that. So I am going to throw out another podcast that I found out recently that is, I think it is fascinating because it introduces a topic of discussion from a viewpoint that is not in my world. So it is called the Accessible Stall Podcast. The hosts throw out topics of discussion of what it is like for people with disabilities to, what it's like in the real world. Like, so for example, um, one of the more recent episodes, they talk about how airports really suck, and then they kind of go into description in their world and in their experience why that is true. One other episode that they had, where it was actually the episode that I discovered these guys, they talked about how being disabled is expensive. And again, their outlook, their viewpoint, their experiences were so very different from mine. I just, even though in a way I had no idea what they were talking about, it still was relatable and understanding. And I just felt like every time I listen to one of their episodes, I'm walking away and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's something I hadn't considered. And I really appreciate the viewpoint. So again, the Accessible Stall Podcast. I found it on Apple Podcasts, but it is available on Google. It is out there. Definitely go, and there will be a link in the show notes. Go check it out. They're cool conversations. Okay, here we go.
Outro.
Outro it is, and I'm gonna go
Yeah.
ahead and I'm gonna let you do the outro.
All right. Well, as always, we appreciate you listening. Be sure to follow the information from this conversation in our show notes. And make sure to like, follow, and please, please, please share out the podcast. We would love for this podcast to make it across the world so we have listeners from all corners of the place. Visit our YouTube channel where we've posted videos of all our conversations, including doing some of the legwork for you by curating videos of topics that revolve around transition. We've created playlists that cover guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, able accounts, and still more to come. So be sure to subscribe there as well. And finally, check out our website, which is chock full of information around the transition process. And you'll find our contact information there too. So make sure to go to www.postsecondarytransition.com.
We're good.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully, that wasn't too much of a mess.
Well, just keep in mind that we have more discussions that are coming, and we are really looking forward to the conversations that we're about to have. So definitely,
Yes.
definitely come back.
Yes, definitely. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.